So there I am on the Santa Monica freeway, and I just totally get cut off by this van in front of me. And I do what I always do. I do the shake this very, how dare you drive like this. And then in the back, through the tinted windows, I can see two figures. They're going like this, you know. And I'm going, oh, they're throwing salt in the wounds after they've cut me off. Now they're going neener, you know. And then I go, oh my God, that's Cece. That's the Homeboy band that just cut my ass off. So at first I do this normally, and then I do this. May God bless you if you're driving. And then I realized, oh my God, that band is our us. So thank you for being here, my Homeboy confreres. You know, I have two kind of usual things I do. One is I have my keynote, Kinship talk. In fact, I just did it here a week ago for the Chicano Studies kind of archive group. And so I'm not going to do that today because I was talking with Georgia, and this is kind of a roll up your sleeves gang talk. So I have kind of two tracks that I usually go on. One is the inspirational keynote, at the Kiwanis Club thing. And then there's everything I believe to be true about gangs. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that one here because of who you are and in respect for this series. So I'm going to yak a bit, and then we'll do question and answers, and you'll be on your way. So first of all, let me just say a little bit about my 5-minute what Homeboy Industries is about. It was started 23 years ago when I was privileged to be pastor of Dolores Mission Parish, which at the time was the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles. And it was nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village, and together they comprised the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. According to the LAPD, we had, at that time, when I drove up as pastor, that was the highest concentration of gang activity in the whole city was there. Because you had 8 gangs, half of them at war with the other half. I buried my first young person killed because of this in 1988. I buried my 173rd, December 22. We're still waiting a word for 174 and 175. Francisco, who was just taken off life support, and Bertha's nephew, who I just found out about yesterday. So we did a lot of things in the early days. First thing we did was a school, because there were so many middle school aged kids who had been given the boot from their home school, all gang members. Nobody wanted them. And I used to wander in the housing projects, and I'd ask these gang members, if I could find a school that would accept you, would you go? And they all said, yeah. Actually, to my surprise, they all said, yeah. Then I couldn't find one. So we started one because I couldn't find one. So we started up on the 3rd floor of the elementary school, which used to be the convent. That became our school called Dolores Mission Alternative. That was the first thing we did. That brought gang members to the church, which kind of upset the notion of what a church ought to be, hermetically sealed, good people in, bad people out. What are you doing, bringing these folks here? And so then gang members kept saying, if only we had jobs, and then myself and mainly women in the parish, because that was mainly the projects made up of women, single mothers with kids, we went marching all around the factories that surrounded the projects in search of felony-friendly employers. So that wasn't so forthcoming. So and we couldn't wait anymore. We were inventing little work things, building child care centers and painting out graffiti and stuff. And then we said, well, let's start our own businesses. So our business. And so first in 1992, we started the Homeboy Bakery, which was nestled right across the street from the church, old 80-year-old building. And got a movie producer to buy that for us. And then a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. And once we had 2 businesses, we came up with the highfalutin Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture. And not everything worked. Anything worth doing is worth failing at. This is one of my mottos. Like Homeboy Plumbing, that didn't go over so well. Who didn't want gang members in their homes. You know, I didn't see that coming. And now we're the largest gang intervention and rehab center on the planet Earth. There is no place larger or engages more gang members or is more comprehensive than Homeboy Industries. We didn't start out to do that. We've sort of backed our way into it. We're in our 4th location. We get 1,000 folks a month who walk through our doors, and we hold out hope to them. A huge curricular offerings from anger management to parenting to Baby and Me, run by the great Teresa. We have huge tattoo removal. We have 3 laser machines, a dedicated clinic, 12 doctors, 4,000 laser treatments a year. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos, gang-related or otherwise. And it all began because of a guy named Frank who wandered into my office 2 days out of Corcoran State Prison, and he sits in front of me at my desk with "fuck the world" tattoo on his forehead from here to here. It was a billboard. And he said, you know, I'm having a hard time finding a job. And I said, well, you know, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this. So I went in search of a doctor who might have a laser machine who might remove this thing. And then suddenly, you know, the guy said, okay, I'll give you 1 hour every 3 months. Well, suddenly I had a waiting list of 2,000 gang members wanting this service. And Frank was in about 6 months ago. He's now a security guard at a movie studio, and no trace whatsoever of the angriest moment in his life. It got all erased. He worked for us at the bakery. Who else, you know, was going to hire him? So, and now we have our businesses. A solar panel installation training program. We have 16 farmer markets that we're in where we sell our products. You may have heard as well that we just last Tuesday have is it 6 salsas? I think it's 6 salsas and chips, Homeboy chips and Homeboy label in 256 Ralph's stores. Go ahead. So we just found out on Monday that the #1 snack, I don't know why they measure these things, but they do. The #1 snack from all that sold the most units in all the Ralphs were our chips, so that was kind of nice. So leave no salsa behind. Please go to all the Ralphs. Super Bowl, just clean those shelves for me. Thank you. There you go. Whoever you wish to win, let our salsas be the big winner. And then we have the Homeboy Bakery still, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegirl merchandise. A Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And they cater at a lot of places. My favorite story there, and then I'll tell you everything I believe to be true about gangs, is that we had Diane Keaton, the Oscar-winning actress and movie star, show up for lunch at Homegirl Cafe. If you've never been there, you know, it's quite the place. It's gourmet, magnificent food. Diane Keaton, who won an Oscar for Annie Hall and is in all the Godfather movies, she shows up, and her waitress, we'll call her Lisa. The homegirl been there, done that, gang member, tattooed, felon, parolee. She's taking her orders. She doesn't know who Diane Keaton is. And so Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Lisa says, well, here are my 3 favorite dishes. And so Diane Keaton lands on the second one. I'll take that one. And then something dawns on Lisa. She looks at Diane Keaton. She says, wait a minute, I feel like I know you. Like we've met somewhere. You know, and Diane Keaton decides to be sort of deflected humbly. Oh gosh, I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before. And Lisa goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. It just took my breath away when I heard it. And none of us believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings fighting since that point, so maybe we have, I doubt it. You hear all the things that I believe to be true about gangs and sort of a departure point, if you will. And the first thing is human beings involved. Years and years ago, they used to say that there was, and again, a lot of this feels old and sort of rusty and creaky, and I'm glad that it does, because things have changed in the last quarter of a century since I've been working with gang members. But in the old days, you know, a law enforcement used to have a shorthand. They would say if they found a homeless person dead, or a drug addict dead, or a prostitute dead, or a gang member dead, there was a shorthand. This was true in a lot of jurisdictions and law enforcement agencies. We have an NHI on the corner. We found an NHI on the corner of 4th and Glass. And NHI meant one of those people, prostitute, drug addict, gang member, homeless person. No human involved is what it meant. And I remember reading this once in the LA Times, and I thought, well, that's where you begin, with human beings. That demonizing is always wrong, not because it's just morally bankrupt, but because it's always untruthful. And that's where you have to begin. The minute anything becomes even remotely demonizing, you will begin to walk down a path that will lead you to unhappy results. There are certain places from which you have to begin, otherwise things get unfortunate. Homeboy Bakery, as I mentioned, was our first venture, and it was quite a popular place when it opened. A lot of people wanted to come see it. A lot of news crews came, and exceedingly popular. We had Prince Philip's business advisors came to visit the place. It was Pip Pip Cheerio meets the homies, you know, and everybody came to visit, busloads of tourists. It burned to the ground, it was started in 92, burned to the ground in October of 99, and I remember racing over there and watching the flames shooting through the roof, fire trucks surrounding the place. Women in the projects which faced the bakery came out crying, hugging me, promising me that once the sun came up, they would have a venta de comida, they would sell food to raise money. I remember a young woman named Lucero, 13 years old, wrapped her arms around me sobbing. She says, "Don't worry, G, we'll have a car wash." That should put us over the top. So, also to tell you how creaky this story is, because that's 1999, in those days, when my staff gathered with me to commiserate and watch these flames shoot through the roof, all of us felt that it was arson. So in those days, if you can imagine that the first 10 years of Homeboy Industries were really marked by vitriol, hate mail, bomb threats, death threats. It's hard to even imagine now, because none of it happens now, but the first 10 years packed with that stuff. Mainly, if I wrote an op-ed piece where I started to suggest that perhaps gang members were human beings, and that maybe this was about a lethal absence of hope, and what if we were to infuse hope to kids for whom hope was foreign. Trust me, the next day it was bomb threat, death threat, hate mail. I remember somebody on my staff in those early days at 1848 East 1st Street suggested that we change our after-hour recording to say, "Thank you for calling Homeboy Industries. Your bomb threat is important to us." For Father Greg, push one, you know, so one of my favorites was a homegirl named Lisa. She was a tough cookie, and she was kind of a no-shit sister, and I'm in my office, in our first office, and she answers the phone. "Homeboy Industries, how may I help you?" "Bring that bomb over here, motherfucker. Bring it over right here. 1848 East 1st Street. Oh gosh, Lisa, yeah, what was that? And she puts her hand over it's just some fool wants to blow the place up. How about God bless you and have a nice day, you know, so that was part of the air we breathed, really, in those days. You know, we all dreaded to listen to the answering machine. You didn't have voicemail in those days. And it was really quite common. And so a lot of times when I tell, in the old days when I used to tell that story, people used to think, oh, so gang members would threaten. Of course not. Because gang members, this was a symbol of hope to them. It held out hope only all the time, even if they weren't ready to walk toward hope. But in those days, it's hard to imagine. The demonizing was so complete that if you were the friend of our enemy, you were our enemy. If you were helping the population that we demonized, we hate you. So that was quite common. So there we were watching the flames shoot through the roof. I had just written an op-ed piece the day before, and we all kind of thought, uh-oh, somebody's finally come in here and set the place on fire. But within a half hour, the fire inspector determined that it was natural causes. It was an 8-year-old building. The wiring was faulty and it percolated in the wall, and so that's what happened. But we didn't know this initially, so this old Irish-looking fire inspector walks up to me. Somebody must have pointed me out. And, you the owner? I said, yeah. Got any reason to believe why somebody might have set this fire? I said, no. I'm feeling my nose grow. And you didn't have any disgruntled ex-employees, did you? I said, no, all the disgruntled ones are still working for me. Get them to move on, actually. And then he confides in me, he leans into me and he says, you know this area where the bakery's located? I go, yeah. It's known for hoodlums, he says to me. Like this news might come as a surprise to me. And I said, well, at Homeboy Industries, we are only hiring hoodlums, And the guy laughed, not at all. So the next day, we informed everybody, and all of a sudden, there are all these enemies who work together, baking bread, picking through the rubble, commiserating. And we weren't able to find one kid named Danny, and so Danny shows up with his perfectly ironed Homeboy uniform, white, planchada, Homeboy bakery over here, Danny emblazoned over here, and his step is light as he gets off the bus, and he walks closer to the parking lot. And once he enters the parking lot, he stops, he's frozen, he sees the smoke wafting through the roof, and the soggy mess that the firefighters had pulled out, and he sees his co-workers, mainly enemies, picking through the rubble. And he puts his head in his hands and he begins to sob, and he can't stop crying because this was a whole lot more than a job. It was his reason to get up in the morning, and more importantly, his reason not to gangbang the night before. In fact, the bond that he enjoyed with his co-workers was stronger than anything he had ever known in his family, and certainly more powerful than anything he had known in his gang. So all we could do was surround him with love and the promise of rebuilding, and that's what we've done. So for the last 4 years, we've been at our current location. The bakery was kind of the symbol. It was the first place. It was, what if we were to invest in folks rather than seek to incarcerate our way out of this problem? And so, we were up and running, and there was a kid named Roman, who was one of arguably the biggest drug dealers I ever knew in the housing projects. He always resisted any effort of me to hire him. Until I must have been the birth of his daughter, Lisette. But he finally, he said, can I work at that bakery? And he was such a leader in his gang that he ended up becoming the foreman of the bakery. And not only did he work with enemies, he supervised them, which is a great deal more difficult. So, but because he was the foreman, he had to greet all the news crews and the busloads of Japanese tourists, and he had to do that. He hated this part of the job, and the oddest request we ever got was a bunch of farmers from the Central Valley who wanted to visit the bakery. And so we're waiting for them to arrive, and he's having kind of a bad attitude day, and do I gotta, and I hate giving these tours. I said, guy, you think I don't? And so we're waiting there, and then all of a sudden this very sleek, ultra-modern bus pulls up, filled with Central Valley farmers, and who wanted desperately to see this bakery. And as it's pulling, I'm saying, just go ahead and park right over there. And Roman notices it has, it's one of those buses with the microphone up in the front from the tour guide, and so he sees that, and as they're parking, welcome to Homeboy Bakery. Observe gang members in their natural habitat. Please keep your hands in the bus at all times. Do not attempt to feed the homies. They are not yet tame. And then I really cállate, cabrón. So, and they come up and how you doing, welcome. And I pass them off to Roman, and I go to my office, which was just a few blocks away. And so when I come back later on in the day, in those days I used to check in on the bakery as much as I could. And I said, well, by the way, how did that tour go? And he goes, damn, what's up with white people anyway? I said, I don't know. What is up with us? And he said, well, they always be using the word great. I go, we do? He goes, yeah, watch, I check this out, this busload of gavachos, these farmers, they come in here and they go, wow, this bakery, it's great. And they see the homies, enemies working side by side with each other. You fellas are great. And they try our bread and they go, wow, this bread, it's great. He said, how come white people always be using the word great? I said, I didn't know this until you brought it to my attention. And trust me, from that moment forward, every opportunity I could find, I told him how great he was, just to mess with him, And so one day, late at night, I used to go there at 11 almost every night as they were closing up. And so I pull up and he sees me from inside, races to my car. Now, Roman was never excited about anything, but he had to get to me to tell me this thing. He goes, gee, you're not going to believe what happened yesterday after my shift. And he tells me that he went to go pick up his daughter, Lisette. She was just 4 years old, at the babysitter. And he puts her in the car, and he drives to their humble little apartment where for the very first time in his life, he's paying rent with honestly earned, clean, decent money. He unlocks the front door, and Lisette just goes running down the hall, and she gets to their little sala, and she plants her feet, and she extends her arms, and she takes the whole place in with her eyes, and she says, this is great. And he said, I thought she was turning white on me. And he gets down at eye level, mija, what's great? And her eyes fill up with tears, and she says, my home. Well, when he says this sort of activates both of us. His eyes well up, and mine can't help but to do the same. And we just stare at each other for what seems to be an eternity. And I break the silence. I look at him and I say, you did this. You've never had home in your life. Now you got one. You did this. You used to be the biggest drug dealer in town, and you stopped. You baked bread instead. You did this. You never had a father in your life, and now you are one. And I hate to have to tell you, but you're great. A lot of stories I don't tell. I haven't told this one in a long time, so it's getting to me. Because I hate to have to tell you that the first time I retrieved it to tell it was, in fact, at his funeral. Just months later. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was packing a car for a camping trip. Somebody came in, faces covered, must have saw him and thought, he'll do. Walked up and killed him. But his friends kept asking me a good question that needed an answer. What's the point of doing good if that can happen to you? So I stood in front of this packed church on the evening of his funeral, and I said, here's the point. That before he died, Roman came to a deep and profound sense of the truth of who he was, that he was exactly what God had in mind when God made him. And so he became that truth. He inhabited that truth, and no bullet can pierce it, and no 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it, because it's great. strategy or solution you embrace will fail. Is that ever not the case? No. Welcome to the human race. There are no demons anywhere. Not in Tucson on a Saturday morning. Not any other place on our planet. There are no demons. Gang violence is an enormously complex issue, and it requires a high degree of reverence. The minute we start to move quickly to a simple solution, we're in trouble. And that's important. I was talking to a kind of high-level senior city official who said, nothing we've ever tried has worked. You know, I said, where have you been? The last 20 years at least, or probably less, since 1992, that's the point I always mark, which is the unrest in the city. People started to do stuff. They didn't wait for mayors or police or anybody else. They started to do stuff. After-school programs, Ellie's Best, Homeboy Industries, a place called Home, Toberman, which has been around for longer, but there you have it. Cities and schools. The list goes on and on. Impacto, Proyecto Pastoral. All these things that chose to do all the things that need to be done in order to be beneficial in terms of this enormously complex social dilemma. If you go to Homegirl Cafe and try the mole, it's the best mole on the planet Earth, but it has 42 ingredients. We found when we tried to market it and try to bottle it, the processors said, yeah, we can't do it, it's too expensive, because it's 42 ingredients. You know, and I don't mean to speak ill of our mole salsa, but they had to change the name to salsa because it's not mole. It tastes like mole, it's a salsa and you use it for chips, but you wouldn't do it as you would use a mole. Because 42 ingredients, that's a lot. Gang violence and membership in this social dilemma has about 42 ingredients. You have to put them all in order for this to work. Everything from after-school programs to Homeboy Industries, to jobs, to intervention, to prevention, to enforcement. There are 42 ingredients. You don't want to leave anything out. If you think there's one ingredient, well that's foolish. It's enormously complex. Gang violence has never been a problem in the history of this county. It's always been a symptom. It's always been an indicator. It's always pointed beyond itself to all sorts of vexing, complex things that we haven't addressed very well. The great disparity between the haves and the have-nots, a poverty that's becoming more entrenched than it ever has been, racism, and above all, inability of young people to imagine a future for themselves. During the decade of death, which was 88 to 98, in my community where I was pastor, I just couldn't believe my eyes. Young people were planning their funerals and not their futures. Fortunate for us, that feels creaky to me as I say it, because it's not so true anymore, which is nice. But it was absolutely endemic. Kids would come up and say, I'm pregnant, and she's 13. And I go, yikes. My face said yikes, even if I didn't say anything. And she says, I just want to have a kid before I die. Now, where does a 13-year-old get off thinking she won't see 18? It was the reason why gang members had kids. They didn't think they were going to live too long. If a young person can't imagine a future for himself or herself, then their present isn't very compelling. And if their present doesn't compel them, then they will not care whether they inflict harm, and they won't care whether they duck to get out of harm's way. That's the way it works. So gang violence is the cough that tells you you're allergic to your cat. You want to deal with the cat, you know, because the symptom is pointing always beyond itself, and you want to address what's undergirding it. Our diagnosis, our treatment plan is only as good as our diagnosis. What we end up doing, our solutions, our strategies, our pieces of legislation, can only be as good as the analysis which undergirds it. Again, this is a story that's as creaky as can be, and how good that it is. I was in Dolores Mission Church getting ready for Mass on a hot summer afternoon, opening the windows to get the air in, and I look out and I see two LAPD hemming up three little munchkins, you know, tiny little gang members. And those days, everybody remembers gang members dressed a certain way, and so they were clearly identifiable as gang members. And so they had them hemmed up, and I'm watching, and they pat them down for contraband or some reason for which to arrest them, guns, drugs, anything. And they don't find anything, and this pisses off one of the cops. And so before he sends the three of them on their way, he takes a huge wad of gum and he plunks it in the hair of a kid named Ernie. Everybody called him Bad Boy. And then he takes the baseball cap, which he had previously flung to the sidewalk, and he smushes it on top of Ernie's head to achieve ultimate stuckness, gum, hair, cap, and then he sends them on their way. So I remember the next day I went to the captain at Hollenbeck Police Precinct, and I told him this story, and I remember asking him this question: what do you suppose the hope was of this officer in doing this to this kid yesterday? And he was very quick with his answer. It was an answer I'd heard many times in those bad old days. He said, our strategy is a simple one. Make life as miserable as we can for the gang member. So, I had to be the one to break it to him. Life is miserable. This is, in fact, redundant. Gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and who doesn't know by now that misery loves company? But you would do well to ask yourself, what was the analysis that undergirded that approach? What was the diagnosis of that police officer in embarking on that particular treatment plan? I think it's easy. He looked at these three kids, even with perhaps well-intentioned as he did it, though the outcome and the action was so terrible. I think he looked at them and said, the problem with these three kids is they're just not scared enough. But by now, everybody in this room knows that these three kids just aren't hopeful enough. Those are two hugely different diagnoses. And you got to get diagnoses right. Nobody's ever met a treatment plan a good treatment plan, born of a bad diagnosis. I had leukemia, went through chemotherapy. I'm feeling fine at the moment, or as the homies always say, I hear your cancer's in intermission. So I'm grateful that it stepped up to the lobby to buy popcorn, But I went to a doctor who I no longer go to, and he said I had mono. So he treated me for mono for 1 year. And I think we can agree that there's a difference between mono and leukemia, but bad diagnosis is not neutral. You lose time, you waste money, suddenly you find yourself behind the 8 ball. And that's not a good thing. Next thing I knew, I was at some horrible level of cancer. I had to rush into chemo. And that's just because we got it wrong. We can't afford to get this one wrong. This is about a lethal absence of hope. And if that's the case, then wouldn't it be certain that a large part of our response would be to infuse these kids with a sense of hope? With great and just unspeakable horror. I was channel surfing the other night, and they've resurrected this terrible Scared Straight series on whatever, and I just happened to catch it. I could not look at it. Remember how many years ago, Georgia, was probably 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was Academy Award-winning documentary, Take Kids into Prisons, and a big scary vato saying, I can't wait until you're my personal sex slave, and again, what did people think? And then they revisited this some years later, and yet it's absolutely proven that this is the stupidest approach anybody could ever. Bona fide data, everybody knows this is a failed approach, and here we are again with this TV series, and it's just knowing what you know now. I could not watch it. Had some young woman just sobbing. Not because she's scared, good Lord, but because she can't conjure up an image of what tomorrow might look like. Anyway, we need to name failed approaches for exactly that. So why do kids join gangs? We have a lot of mythic understandings here. I'm a great thinker when it comes to gangs. I was reading something that this person had written and said we to change the lure of gangs so that it's really less sexy. And I thought, wow, is that what we think this is? Join a gang and see the world. Now, a lot of that comes because of gang members who aren't processed yet, who haven't come to terms with their past. They'll get up, I've done this, gone to college and universities and given talks, and I'm horrified to see gang members get up and say, wow, when I was a kid, that's what I wanted. You know, wine, women, and song, and join a gang and see the world, and fast cars, and women, and money. That's what I wanted. And I thought, nonsense, because these are kids I've known since they were little kids. And I know the kind of horror that they went through. And you might say, yeah, but this is a gang member telling you why you joined the gang. I mean, how are you discounting that? And I go, I don't know what to say, except some people come to terms, and some people it takes a long time. It's a little bit like romancing the drink, as they say in alcoholism. Hey, remember that time, you were wearing the lampshade, and how'd we get home that night? Oh my gosh, ha, ha, ha. What we're not talking about is how your wife left you, your kids hate you, and you're unemployed because of this disease. That's coming to terms. That's the truth. There was a homie who came with me. There's two homies that were going to give a talk at school, and I mentioned this to him. I said, don't do the stuff that everybody expects you to say. That there was a pull factor, that something was luring you, drawing you, attracting you. Wow, gangs. Don't do that, because that's bullshit. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something. Any exceptions to that rule? None. None. No gang is seeking anything when he joins a gang. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something. Always. Now, whether a gang member can talk about that or not, or even knows to talk about it, that's a whole other question. But there are no exceptions to that rule. So I was telling these two homies, don't glorify and romanticize this thing. Be real about it. So they thought about it, and so one guy got up, big, huge vato, who had tattooed, been to prison, late 20s, and he starts talking about his history and his life, and then all of a sudden he stops. And he's not speaking, and I think maybe he's just completely frozen. But what's happened is some kind of slide has appeared. Yeah, I think I might have been like 5. I was playing with matches, and this pissed my mom off. So she grabbed me by the hand, she dragged me into the kitchen, and we had one of those coil kind of stovetop things. And she turned it on high, and she waited till it was red hot. Then she grabbed my hand and she put it right down and she held it there for a long ass time. Well, the whole high school gym just kind of sucks in air. Yeah, and all I remember was I woke up that night. I was asleep on the floor of the bathroom. My hand was in the toilet water, trying to get some relief because my hand was all pussy and burned. And again, the audience took in air. Then he looks at this audience and he says, that's why I joined a gang. He had never come to that memory, that image, that moment until that moment. If we knew that to be true, if we believed that to be true, that no kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang, he's always fleeing something, maybe we'd rescue him. Maybe we'd help that kid. Maybe we'd try to heal that kid. Maybe we'd try to deliver services to that kid. But the outsider view sort of insists on these kinds of things, and we've proliferated them all. My kid wants to join a gang because of a sense of belonging. Well, nonsense. Nonsense. And so you have to do battle with all these mythic understandings of why kids join gangs. I want to say something about gangs because Homeboy Industries, we don't work with gangs. We work with gang members. And that's important. Somebody was reading the other day, we'll never get rid of gangs, but we can reduce gang violence. I go, that's a dangerous kind of point of view. Hardcore gang intervention workers often begin every paragraph with, gangs will always be with us, so we might as well, reduce the violence, I guess. But when people say gangs will always be with us, or we'll never rid ourselves of gangs, they don't speak for my community, the community where I live, which is a hot zone, a place with lots of gang violence, and has for decades. They don't speak for people in my community. Folks that say gangs won't always be with us. In fact, ask any gang member, close your eyes right now. Imagine the community you want for your kid. Imagine it. Okay, open your eyes. Were there gangs there? You won't get a gang member to say, yeah, there were. No, they'll say no. In my imagining of the community I want for my kid, there were no gangs there. Do not say gangs will always be with us. You don't speak for my community when you say that. Even gang members would imagine something different. They don't imagine the day when gangs get along. No, they imagine gangs are not part of the landscape. Gangs are not part of the multiple choice for my kid. A, go to college. B, learn a trade. C, join a gang. No, I don't want this to be part of the multiple choice for my kid. You don't speak for my community if you say gangs will always be with us. And it's one of the reasons why gangs have a life. It supplies them oxygen. If you work with gangs, it seems to me. Now, I say this as somebody who used to do it. I used to do shuttle diplomacy, ride my bike in the middle of the night. Are you sure you want to shoot this guy? Put that Uzi down. I did this for a long time. I don't regret that I did it, but I'd never do it again. I kind of know too much about how that works. It serves the cohesion of gangs, and you don't want to do that. It undermines the will of the people who imagine a day when gangs aren't part of the landscape. And it's the opposite of recovery, and recovery is really what this is about. So if you're trying to deal with alcoholism, and you run an alcohol treatment center, you don't send workers out at 8 o'clock at night and they walk into bars and they sidle up with people and say, gosh, I couldn't help notice that's your 8th beer. People don't do this in recovery. They don't do it in rehab. Why? Because it takes what it takes for somebody to walk towards health. It can take anything. It can take the birth of a son or the death of a friend or a long stretch of prison where suddenly you say, yeah, I don't want this anymore. And that's one step. You can see the difference in recovery between a sober person and somebody in recovery. Huge difference. Coming to terms is sort of what this is about ultimately for a gang member. A homie named Fernie calls me in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning. He's crying. He's about 30. I said, Fernie, why are you crying? He says, you know how grateful I am for my life. I got out of prison and you hired me right away at Homeboy Industries, and I was there with you for 2 years. And then you found me this job I have now, and I've been here for 3 years. And I even have a home that's mine, and my wife and my 2 sons. And I'm so grateful that they're in my life. I said, Fernie, why are you crying? He said, because tonight, for the first time in my life, I feel all the pain for all the hurt I caused. I said, felicidades, welcome. You've arrived at the place where you come to terms with stuff. It doesn't knock anything out of the ring. It doesn't knock the truth of who Fernie is. Exactly what God had in mind when God made him. But it's a fuller picture that sort of obliterates once and for all our tendency to romanticize. I always talk about the 2 refusals. Refuse to demonize a single gang member. Refuse to romanticize a single gang. Gangs are not the Middle East. Gangs are not Northern Ireland. Gang violence is not about anything at all. people say, well, peacemaking, how can you be against peacemaking? You go, peacemaking requires conflict. Find me the conflict in gang violence. You won't be able to. There's violence in gang violence, but there's no conflict. None at all. I know too many shooters. I know what it's about. You see it, you watch it. It's not about, I want my homeland back. I want to practice religion freely. No, it's not about anything. It's a language of the most despondent. It's one of the reasons why a lot of our draconian laws don't work. 3 strikes, 2 strike, 1 strike, doesn't really matter. Because that kind of law only works on somebody who cares and has no impact on somebody who doesn't care. And gang violence is when folks have stopped caring. And so you need to infuse a sense of caring to kids for whom that's, kind of a foreign thing. Law enforcement, this is going to be my last thing, and then I want to open it up. That's improved greatly, and I think we've had a lucky, I think, between Baca and Bratton and Charlie back. We've had real enlightened leadership in the last, 10 years. Prior to that, it was less enlightened. It was hand us a blank check and ask us to take care of this problem. When I drove up 25 years ago, in the vehicle marked gang issue, who was in the vehicle? One stakeholder, law enforcement, and they were at the wheel, period. Step aside, let us handle this. Now cut to 25 years later, tell me about the vehicle. It's a van, it's packed with stakeholders. That's healthy. Teachers, counselors, clergy, social workers, packed with stakeholders. That's healthy. Who's driving the vehicle? Law enforcement. That's unhealthy. That's unhealthy. We need to get to a place where we can recognize that that's unhealthy. We're not there yet, but 25 years ago we were some other place entirely. This has never been a crime issue ever. This has only always been a community health issue. The minute you shift, then everything kind of breaks free. Where police say, we need to be in the vehicle, but trust us, we have this role. Now you ask any chief in the country about this issue of gangs, and they'll say one thing, and they say it over and over again. We cannot arrest our way out of this problem. They all say this now. And it's a way of acknowledging that there are 42 ingredients to Patty's mole, But if you ask the folks at the rank and file still, what's your job? They won't say protect and serve. What will they say? In any jurisdiction in the country, the rank and file will say one thing. Here's our job. Get the bad guy. Google it. Read anything about any kind of jurisdiction where there are gangs and law enforcement at the rank and file level. It's get the bad guy. This is not a good motto. Protect and serve is better. But if it's get the bad guy, you have no choice but to demonize. Because the bad guy is nothing if he's not a demon. And that's always wrong, not because it's morally repugnant, but because it's untruthful. What if you shifted? Our job is to prevent the bad thing. Huge. That breaks the whole thing open. Suddenly the culture changes by saying this differently. Suddenly it's a different narrative. It's not get the bad guy anymore, it's prevent the bad thing. We won't let you hurt yourself. We won't let you hurt anybody else. That feels remotely loving to me. And that would be a healthy place for us to end up. We're not there yet. I was interviewed by Tavis Smiley the other night, and he was decidedly negative about where we are. I'm positive. I'm hopeful because I see the incremental change that's come from hate mail at Homeboy Industries to kind of an embracing of what this means, that people buy had chips that say jobs, not jails on them. Go figure. That feels like progress to me. In the end, it's about creating a community of kinship such that God might recognize it, where we're in this together. And the poet Mary Oliver writes, there's some things you can't reach, but you can reach out to them, and all day long. And Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills this way by suggesting that the problem is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we together stand against forgetting that we belong? My hunch is if that was our starting point, our ending point in terms of solving this gang dilemma would look quite different. How can we achieve and seek a compassion that can stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it? And that's key. Let me just tell you one last story, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. People always ask me about enemies working side by side with each other. And in the end, what happens at Homeboy in terms of enemies is the same thing as what happens in society if we let it happen. The greatest aspiration and desire of any human being is that we might be in kinship with each other. That you imagine a circle of compassion, and then you imagine nobody standing outside that circle. So people always ask about enemies, because that's sort of one of the byproducts of being hired at Homeboy Industries. You have to work with people you hated and shot at. So homies will come in and say, I really want to work. I go, well, how about in the bakery? But you're going to have to work with X, Y, and Z. And I rattle off the names of enemies. And they always think for a second, and they go, okay, I'll work with him, but I'm not going to talk to him. Which used to bother me in my early days until, you discover that it's impossible to demonize somebody you know. So years and years ago, when I had time to do this kind of thing, I remember walking a homie named Youngster into the silkscreen factory. And I'm introducing him to all his co-workers, about 25 of them on the floor of this factory. And he's shaking hands with everybody, looking them in the eyes, even his enemies. I think, excellent. Until we get to this kid named Puppet. And when Puppet and Youngster see each other, they mumble something, they stare at their feet, they don't shake hands. Well, I know what gangs they're from, so I know they're enemies. But he just finished shaking hands with other enemies. I discover later that this is an animosity that's quite deep. They really hate each other and do not think they can get beyond this hatred. I sense that much at the moment. And so I say, look, if you guys can't hang working together, let me know right now. I got so many people who want this job. And they don't say anything. So about 6 months later, a Puppet finds himself taking a shortcut home from a little tienda. And he cuts through an alley. And because he does, he finds himself suddenly surrounded by 10 enemies. 10 against 1. They beat him badly. He falls to the ground. While he's lying there, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lying there lifeless. Somebody finds him, takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But the policy is to keep you connected to machines for 48 hours, so you get a flat read, and as official, you sign the death certificate. That allowed people to come and say goodbye. I was in St. Louis University giving a talk. I flew home. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life. Nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many, many times in size. It was so horrifying you could barely train your eyes on him. So at the end of the 48-hour period, I gave him la unción de los enfermos. I anointed him as a priest, and they disconnected. And a week later, I buried him. But in the first 24 hours, I'm alone in my office at 8:30 at night, and I get a phone call from Youngster, Puppet's co-worker at the silkscreen. And he says, hey, that's messed up about what happened to Puppet. I said, yeah, it is. And then with even a certain kind of eagerness, he says, Is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood? And we both fall silent under the weight of it. And then finally he breaks the silence, choking back his tears. And he says with great deliberation, he was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together. Now, can I honestly say that's always happened? Yes. Can I say that there has ever been an exception to that moment? Never. No exception. Always happens. And it shouldn't surprise us, because our deepest longing as human beings on this planet is that we be in kinship with each other. And yeah, maybe there are some things you can't reach, but you can reach out to them. And all day long, I'm holding you captive here, and you're not leaving until you ask me questions till 2 o'clock. Sure, thank you. Now, please raise your hand and tell me I'm full of shit, because that will energize me. Yes?
How did you get the homies to trust you? How did you build that relationship with people?
Yeah, now, how did the homies get to a point where they trusted me? And this is a really important question, because one of the great pitfalls is we disqualify ourselves. We say about ourselves, okay, wait a minute, let me do an inventory here. I'm white. I've never been in a gang. When I was growing up, I wouldn't know where to find a gang if you sent me on a scavenger hunt. Wouldn't know what a gang member looked like if one hit me upside the head. I've never been to prison. I don't have any tattoos. You start doing this list of how I can't be a beneficial presence. And it's a human thing. So because it's a human thing, it requires a pulse. Period. That's all it requires. It's a human thing. And sometimes people go, you know, I've been there, done that, I'm an ex-gang member. Step aside, let me handle this. He's more likely to listen to me than he is to listen to you. And if the task was that kid listening to somebody, then maybe you're right. But the task is us listening to him. And because that's the task, is there anybody in this room who couldn't listen to that kid? No. And suddenly, again, I have endless lists of people who you would on the surface say least likely to connect only because of their background or something. And yet, because they choose to be reverent in the face of this kid and listen to this kid and value this kid and hold this kid and guide this kid and heal this kid, you know, then suddenly this is the great moment of kinship where you go, everybody can be a beneficial presence to this kid. And so rather than narrowing and making this rarefied, we break the whole thing wide open. We were almost there in this city because we named a gang's arm. We were that close to saying, wait a minute, we're going to break this wide open. And then suddenly, quite regrettably, I think it became narrow again. Whereas in the bad old days, it was cops saying, step aside, let us handle this. And now, I think unfortunately, it says hardcore gang intervention workers on the streets are saying, step aside and let us handle this. When anybody says, including a priest with a beard who runs the program, who says, step aside, let me handle this, don't trust that person. Because all that says is, not all hands on deck, just a few of us. It's a dangerous job, somebody's got to go in there. It's all nonsense, because it's eliminating the power in this room. And you can't do it. So, but specifically what I did, I used to teach high school at Loyola High School, and I remember walking to my class, and there was this old woman who was a veteran teacher, and I had all my books and my coffee. I said, hey, give me some advice. My first day of class, she's reading the LA Times. She never looked at me. She just said 2 things. Know every name by tomorrow, and it's far more important that your students know you than that they know what you know. It was good advice, especially the name part. What do gang members primarily do for a living? They write their names on walls. I got to know their names fast. I didn't forget their names. I had mnemonics where I would say, try to remember what this kid's name was. And then I would go to, in those days, those were the days of the wounded. Buckshot, it's hard to even imagine, 22s. Weapons that were not of the caliber they are now. Now if you get hit, chances are you're not going to survive it. But in the old days, I visited 3 hospitals a day, lots of wounded. And they never forgot this. And they came out, they said, that priest visited me. Or I got into the juvenile halls fast. And when they're most vulnerable, and they get out and they say, yeah, that guy came to see me. And pretty soon I had juice. But in the beginning days, they all thought I was a narc, just because I'm white, My very first day as pastor there, I'm sitting in my office waiting for somebody to come and see me. Nobody did, so I went, screw this. So I start to walk out in the parish, and a cop car pulls me over and says, what are you doing? And of course it was racial profiling because I was white, so, because if you're white and you're in this community, you're obviously going to buy drugs, but what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm the new priest, And, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm walking in my parish. We don't recommend that you do that. This is day one, being told by the cops, don't walk in your parish. Can you imagine? Anyway, that's how dicey the parish was in those days. But yes, sir.
In your opinion, what makes your program so successful?
What makes a program so successful? Well, here's what I think. In the old days, this is starting to feel creaky to me too. When we used to say, nothing stops a bullet like a job. Our t-shirts say that. That goes way back. That's old school. And in the old days, I used to think, don't send a SWAT team in here to gobble up gang members. Send a van filled with employers. Watch what will happen. So it was kind of simplistic. But even in those days, I used to say a job does 85% of the deal. And now, I think what makes us successful is that 15%. 15% is therapeutic community. 15%, and I steal all this from Teresa, our great counselor, one of the many therapists there, about attachment repair. That's what happens. So if gang members show up with a disorganized attachment, mom was frightening or frightened, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed, that happens every day at Homeboy Industries. That's the difference. That's what I've seen come to see, where I go, why is this not always working when kids get a job? Because they have to heal stuff. They have to come to terms. They have to look at all sorts of things. And community trumps gang. And that's when it becomes complete. Because they can get a job but still not come to terms with what the gang life was about. So community shines light into all the dark corners of their lives, especially into the hollow, empty gang past that they used to pledge allegiance to. I always ask gang members the same thing. Name one good thing that's come into your life because of your neighborhood. I've never had a kid say anything. Well, one guy once said me carpool. I said, shut up. So he went on to become America's, what's the comic, Felipe Esparza? He used to say, gangs aren't all bad, they carpool, The last comic standing was a kid in the parish where I was pastor, and he was a member of a gang there, and I sent him to rehab. But no gang member can come up with any answer. Name one good thing that's come into your life. Occasionally they'll try to be slick. I wouldn't have met you. No, don't you do that either. I'm talking about the gang. You pledge allegiance to this. Tell me a good thing that came into your life. Sadness, unspeakable horror. Yes, that's come into your life. Yes, ma'am.
Just talking about the fact that the gang providing belonging. What does it provide? 'Cause I think that's a really common
again, it's about belonging. And again, I really want to insist on this because here's what happens. A kid joins a gang. What's the first thing you do? You want to make this reasonable. Rational action, rational actors. It's one of the great difficulties, it seems to me, in law enforcement at the moment. Every action is a rational action performed by a rational actor. So if a kid joins a gang, the outsider view, and this is understandable and it's human, you want to figure it out. Oh, okay, I get it. He's a sense of belonging. All right, I see that. Every kid wants to belong. It's like being on the team or the Boy Scouts or something. But everybody outside wants to make sense of this. Is there a kid who joins a gang who does not know this will end in death or prison? No. Every kid knows this. What's the problem? They don't care. That's the problem. And that's why, against all reason, you're going, in my early days, it was one of these shake the lapel thing, don't you see where this will end? Well, of course they do. Do they know this better than I do? Of course they do. They don't care. That's the key. That's why it's irrational action. And all gang activity is that way. Cops want to make this really, really rational at the level of, organized crime. They're in the map room, with the pointers. Tonight at 11:04, we're going to hit Lefty because we don't like him. As if it's random. It's nobody knows that it's going to happen. And the most desperate guy in the car who happens to have a gun is going to do this. Not because anybody planned it. So I think we need to stop trying to make this reasonable. That's one of the very first lessons I learned. Stop reasoning with this. So, years ago I went on to go give a talk in DC, and I'm getting my luggage, and there's a big, huge public service announcement, and it has a photograph of a teenage African-American male, and he's just looking out. And next to him, it says, if you want to end teenage drinking, insert message here. And it has a big arrow pointing in his ear. And I think, is that what we think teenage drinking is about? We forgot to tell him he could have had a V8. That this is the lack of information. We just haven't gotten the information to him. But if we inserted the message here, it probably would work. And on the same trip, I'm in Philadelphia giving a talk, and there's another public service announcement. Apparently they do this on the East Coast, on the freeway, and it said in graffiti-style writing, virgin, tell your kid it's not a dirty word. Is that what you think underage sex or premarital sex or teenage pregnancy, is that what you thought it was about? Did you really think you needed to tell your kids that virgin is not a dirty word? Again, as I mentioned earlier, why are kids in the barrio having kids? Because they can't imagine what the grand old age of 25 might look like. And why is a kid at 13 drunk by 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Trust me, it's not because of lack of information. It's insert message here, not here. But we get stuck on that all the time. We think just say no and dare and all these other things are about, let's get the message to these kids. No, it's about what's the profile of any gang, any kid who joins a gang? Three-pronged. One, the kid is either mentally ill if he's joined a gang, or he's deeply despondent, or he's severely traumatized and damaged, or a combo burger of the three. Anything else? No. Now, if you knew that to be true, you would rescue a kid who was in danger, you'd heal a kid who's been damaged, or you deliver mental health services in a timely manner to a kid who needs them now. So when that kid, I'm blanking out on his name, whatever he was, 13, 14 years old, sitting outside the Pomona courthouse, and he kills a CHP officer who just happens to be there. And cops get him, LAPD gets him, and he says, I killed that cop to impress my gang. Front page of the LA Times. I'm reading it with my morning coffee, and I go, that kid's mentally ill. I've never met him. Bona fide, absolute 100% mentally ill. Why? Well, because it's not impressive to kill a cop. It brings unspeakable heat on your body. Nobody who's sane does this. And the minute it happened, huge raids of Pomona Trece gang. He had to be immediately put into protective custody. His father, who has the same name, who was in prison, had to lock it up because his life was in danger. Stop me if this is sounding impressive to his gang. I sat at lunch with high-level LAPD, and I was going on about this, saying, the kid was mentally ill. Mentally ill. I've never met him, but he's mentally ill. And the cops looked at me and said, but that's what he said. He said that's why he did it. And I go, and you believed him? Can you imagine believing this kid? All the other data tells you clearly the kid's mentally ill. Then I got to know the kid. Then I met the kid. And then I get to meet his homies. Every time some kid one-on-one at probation camp said, I'm from Pomona Trece. Oye, do you know this vato? Ooh, he's not all there, G. You know, even the kids. They've never taken Psych 101 for credit. They know the kid's mentally ill. Now I say this because it's not to excuse the fact that somebody killed a cop. Hello? I mean, nobody's that unsophisticated, are they? I mean, I don't mean you, I mean in the world. My point is, go back and do something that would turn that clock back and would have changed those circumstances. If you were more draconian and hard-nosed and tougher on crime, would that have changed that moment? Of course not. Why? Because the kid was mentally ill and needed to be rescued from his family. Once you start to read it and hear about his family, he needed to be rescued. But if you had gone back in a timely manner and rescued this kid and healed his damage and really made sure he got the mental health services he needed, that moment never would have come. But we don't do this. We don't even do it in Tucson when 6 people get killed. We don't. It doesn't make us talk about guns or mental health. We talk about everything else but if you could reach back and do something really effective, that's why we need to talk about those things so that we really know what this is about. But when police are saying, he said that's why he did it. And because that fits in. Rational action, rational actor, he said that's why he did it. And you'll still get cops in their training. Now understand that you're the number one enemy to the Latino gang member. And if they shoot you and kill you, this is really a notch, a feather in their hat. You go, do any of you know gang members? Do you know how any of this works? That's insane what you've just said. And it's on the post tape, which is police officer special training. When they train police officers to deal with Latino gang members, they tell them exactly those two things. You are the number one enemy. And if they kill you, feather in the hat. That's insane, and that's how they train people. You just go, how can that be? Yes, sir.
I was just curious if you have any ideas or approaches or strategies for how to help keep people safe who are trying to make a change.
So what do you mean by that? Like the folks in my office who are trying to...
Yeah. People who come in to get a job.
Yeah, again, those are... And again, a lot of people have mythic understandings, you know, blood in, blood out. I'm going to walk away from that. I'm not going to kick it with the homies. I'm going to have a life. I'm going to love my son more than I hate my enemies. And I'm going to go to Homeboy. I'm going to get my tattoos removed. And I'm going to work there. And now what? All my homies want to kill me? I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen it. 95% of all gang members want what these folks have. In the same way, if you're shooting up heroin and you're lost in heroin and you see somebody who just came out of rehab, you're not going to hate on that person. You're going to go, yeah, good for you. I'm not there yet. Maybe I will be one day. But it's not, now I hate you because you're not shooting up heroin like me. Preposterous. It's the same thing. But 5% of gang members are really deeply mentally ill, sociopathic, psychopathic, they need a timeout. If you run into that percentile at Montebello Town Center, and you've already stepped away from the gang life, and they might get in your face, where have you been? But part of the reason Homeboy works is because that whole thing about attachment repair leads you to what? Resilience. And more importantly, re-identification. I know who I am now. Oh, I used to think a man was somebody who got in your face and threw down. No, that's not a man. I used to think courage looked like this. No. So I see a guy named Johnny at Target, and he's got his 2 kids hanging on the shopping cart, and he worked for us for a time. Then we got him a better job, and now I hadn't heard from him in a long time. I always test the homies. Do you go to the Vadio? Do you see any of the homies? No, I don't go over there. Do they contact you? No. Well, last week I did get a phone call from a youngster, a little knucklehead kid. I don't even know him. I don't know how he got my number. He said, all the homies, we're having a meeting this Saturday. You have to be there. I said, what'd you say to him? He said, I'm a grown-ass man. I have a job. I have 2 kids. I'm married. I'm not going to your meeting. Wow. What did the vato say? He called me a punk, which is quite strong. I said, wow, what did you say to him? He goes, if I was a punk, I'd be going to your meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the perfect answer, because he sort of walked in their door and he came out his door. He said, all right, I'll turn punk on its head. You cannot punk me to go to this meeting. Why? You're talking to a real man. You're talking to a father. You're talking to a working person. Are you shitting me? I'm not going to your meeting. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. But that's the sound of somebody who has re-identified and has gone through the process of resilience, attachment repair, deal with your shit, come to terms. I know what this is. The light of community has illumined every dark corner of my gang past that was hollow, empty. And that's important because that's the whole deal. And we hate when people leave Homeboy Industries because it's home, but we always want them to come back. But when that moment arrives, we got to go on. You'll be fine. Yes, back there.
If the mayor came down to the bakery and he said he wants to appoint you the director of the city gang program, what kind of, I'm not asking you if you'll take the job, but assuming you would, what kind of program would you design for the city's program?
Well, first of all, I'd say, as the homies say when they text me, OHN, oh hell no. I don't have any doubt about that. Or because it's Antonio, I'd say, chale ni mangos, no way. But again, there isn't one thing. I would propose everything that I've talked about today about, 42 ingredients and make sure that everybody did it. Pulled in everybody. There's no such thing as step aside, let me handle it. It would be churches, come on, schools, stay open longer. You could galvanize the city that should have happened and it didn't. Where anybody who started to step away from this and absenting themselves as disqualified to do anything, the gang czar would have said, no, come on. Can you tutor? Can you read? Come on. Yeah. Do you know how to take have you ever passed the written driver's test? Come here. Sit down with that guy. Somebody could have galvanized the community in such a way. Are you an employer? Yeah. Hire somebody right now. Yeah, he's got a felony. Come on now. Good. We got you. Who else? That's what a gang czar would do in the city. And the mayor doesn't have to do it because you really do need somebody other than the mayor to be the cheerleader. But that's the job description of a gang czar, and I was hopeful. As long as it's the task of the chief of police, we're screwed. No matter how enlightened, and they are enlightened. But you need somebody who's going to put all hands on deck. Everybody, every church, every school, every boys and girls club, come on. Don't let anybody fall in between the cracks. And social workers, if a kid needs to be rescued, and that kid who killed the cop, oh baby, did he need to be rescued? Horrifying. And I know we want this kid to stay with his family. Nope. We're going to rescue you right now, because the kid doesn't get to go through that, period. And you need to have that kind of thing, because then all of a sudden nobody does anything, and he's sitting outside a Pomona courthouse, crazily waiting to kill somebody. Yes, ma'am?
I was wondering what you suggest for those of us who work with youth who are in gangs. Because it seems like, you have to go through a few steps on your own before you would walk through the doors of a place like Homeboy. What do we say to them? Because they have so many reasons why they need to keep gangbanging. Like, well, I'm going to the hall soon, and if I don't gangbang there, then I'm going to get killed. And they can give you a million reasons why they can't get out. And I don't know what to say. I'm like,
Well, don't reason with it, and see, that's part of the thing, because all that's sort of nonsense. But the real deal is, all of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, used to call enlightened witnesses, and that's the role you're in. People who, through your kindness, tenderness, focused, attentive love, return kids to themselves. You are not holding the bar up and asking that kid to measure up. You're showing up, holding the mirror up. Here's the truth. Don't blink. Don't turn your eyes away. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. The only antidote to a kid who can't imagine a future is a loving, caring adult who shows up and pays attention. That's the thing. But once we start to get into, don't you see, and well, that's not true, and I bet maybe you could sidestep this. No, because the real deal is he doesn't know who he is. And the minute he knows who he is, and he values himself as much as you've shown up to value him, then he can withstand anything. And are there fates worse than death? Yeah, not knowing the truth of who you are happens to be one of them, And Georgia Leap, she's just damn ass hook. I see 10 minutes and we're getting good. Yes. We're ignoring Georgia. Yes.
How do you replicate Homeboy Industries?
No, right here, this gentleman.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I'll get to you.
I've heard you talk about walking out in the parish, on the street, listening to the stories of the problems of the people who you want to help. I want to know sort of the mechanics of your outreach and how do you reach gangsters with your message of hope? And maybe some of the homies want to talk about how you actually connected with them with that message. And do you think there's a limitation to it? Like, you're only one man. You've done a lot. Is there a limit to what you can do the way you're trying to do outreach now?
Yeah, I don't do outreach. That's an important thing. At this point, when I go to any city to give a talk or whatever, and I always have the obligatory 7 o'clock in the morning breakfast meeting with the mayor and the chief and people who are trying to do something similar. I'm going to anticipate your question. Who want to do a similar thing in Wichita or Spokane. They always have one question for me. Do you know what the question would be? Always. It's always the very first question. How do you get this population to show up? Because no matter what they have, they can't get the population to show up. Now, we've been at it for 23 years, and all of you came from different places, but a lot of it, comes from word of mouth. I've heard about the place, and a friend told me. Or, I'm in 25 different detention facilities, so where I do Catholic services, so I preach, And I hand out my card, and I always, especially the kids in probation camps, I'm in all of those camps, come the minute you get out, come and see me and I'll hire you right away. Now you would think that would be an impossible situation I'm putting myself in, but they don't come. They may come 15 years later. I get this all the time. They reach into their wallet and now they're all tatted down and they show me this card and it's 4 addresses ago and it's yellowed and folded. He said, I should have come a long time ago. It takes what it takes. You can hit bottom or you don't have to. One kid shows up the next day, a kid named Louis, 17 years old. He goes, here I am. I just got out yesterday, and you were the very first person I came to see. And never in my life had I seen more hickeys on a human being than on this guy, Louis. It goes, Chupeto Nasolandia, all over his his neck, on his cheeks. I said, Louis, I have a feeling I was your second stop. So that's the spectrum, you know, people come, and it's heartbreaking, I'll be honest with you, because I baptized a kid named Manuel at Camp Miller, and he was about to leave. I said, call me. I'll never forget that I baptized him. Cut to 6 months later, he's in Camp Kilpatrick, it was right next door. I do his first communion. I'll never forget that I gave you your first communion. Call me. And I just saw him last week at Silmar, what they call the compound. Murder, caught on tape. He said, I sure wish I had called you. You know, heartbreaking. But, you know what, we don't do outreach. You know, people come or they don't come. We're not going to coax them. We have sort of a hairy eyeball if somebody drags them in, like a probation officer or a mom. Moms will bring minors in, take that tattoo off his face. We sequester him and say, you want that tattoo off? Oh, hell no. We tell the mom we're not going to do it. He'll come back when he's ready. One last question, because George is giving me the evil eye. Yes?
How much of your personal
The
time,
Greek evil eye. Say it again.
how much of your personal time do you get to work on some of these one-on-one interactions, and what other stuff are you involved with, especially fundraising and those kind of things?
Yeah, when I'm in the office, it's kids line up and they come in and, you know, want to share their intractable problem with you. And I'm a little bit triage nurse, unfortunately, because there are too many people. Okay, go talk to Teresa, that's a mental health issue, or you need to talk to our legal department, or, okay, I'm going to have you sit down with this case manager because you need to find a place to stay, you know, that kind of thing. So when I'm not there, I'm here. This is my day off. And I can't think of a better way to spend my day off with all of you. I'm feeling I'm exerting you over here. Anyway, thank you all very much.